Hi, Karen. Welcome to the Getting Married Multiculturally podcast, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm super interested and really happy that you're doing this type of thing because I
Oh,
really wish that this was something that I had discovered when I was planning
yeah,
my wedding. So thank you.
absolutely. Oh, yeah, you're welcome. I keep hearing this, so that just keeps me going, that there's a need for this. So, yeah. I'm
Absolutely.
really excited to hear your story. So we connected through the Brightchilla community, and
Yes.
you said that you had a blended multicultural wedding, and that's why we're here to talk about that. But before
Hmm.
we get into it, can you share with the listeners a little bit about who you are, where do you live now, where are you from originally, and a little bit about your husband and who he is and where he is from?
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, so I am born and raised in Canada. Canadian. But my family background is from El Salvador, which is a little country in Central America. Um, and my husband, also born and raised in Canada, from the same city, Montreal. And his father's side is from Italy, and his mother's side is from Tunisia. So his parents immigrated here when they were quite young, like toddlers, whereas my parents immigrated here when they were in their late teens.
So, do you want to share a little bit about how did you two meet? What is your husband's name again?
His name is David.
David. Okay.
Yeah. So we actually met in school. Where I live in Quebec, just to give you a tiny bit of background, our education system is slightly different. So our high school goes until grade 11, and then our university is U1, 2, 3.
Okay.
So there's a school between high school and university that we call CEGEP. And so it's basically like grade 12 and U0 together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we met. And through a mutual friend who I was very, very good friends with during high school, and my husband had been very good friends in elementary school, but they had lost touch, met up in CEGEP, and that friend introduced us, and then the rest is history.
Yeah.
And that was 14 years ago,
Uh-huh.
actually.
Oh, wow. That's a long time. You guys just
Yeah.
recently got married, right?
Yes. Yeah, we
Yeah.
got married about 10 months, well, actually 10 months ago,
Oh,
in February. Yeah.
wow. Were you so this is interesting because I mostly interviewed couples who were from other countries, just recently moved or pretty like freshly immigrated couples. And I really love to hear your experience on how did you guys started talking about being from different countries, or oh, my family and my parents are from this other culture, and did you was that a conversation even that came up, or is it something that you just consider yourself to be Canadians and you know
No, it was definitely something that came up because I do speak Spanish. He
okay.
doesn't speak Italian or Arabic. His parents hadn't taught. They don't themselves don't really speak it. They understand it more than speak it. So, but uh, there were still elements about each other that we weren't aware of, having grown up in our own culture. So his mom is Tunisian Jewish.
Okay.
I have a lot of friends that are Jewish, but uh, I was still interested to know like how his upbringing was, and his Italian upbringing also, and he was interested as well. And I would say that I guess the starting point, if you will, for those conversations is often centered and continues to be centered around food.
Hmm.
So, so me sort of introducing him to Latin American foods that are very typical to El Salvador that he, would not have tried before. And vice versa. So the traditions that he has and yeah, from his background. So yeah.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your wedding. When did you guys do you have some story to share us about how did you get engaged and started,
Yeah.
this level of your relationship?
Yeah, so I will say that for many, many years, I did not want to get married.
Okay.
I,
You didn't
uh,
want to have a relationship, or you just didn't want to have a relationship in the marriage level?
I would say, no, no, I definitely so we met when we were just shy of 18, and I felt like, he was the one, and I would, spend the rest of my life with him. So it wasn't that commitment part of it. It was more like, um, I guess I just didn't really see the point of having the the
The
paper, you know?
paperwork. Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that my parents did split up when I was quite young, and so my mom married later. Uh, so she had never gotten married to my father.
Oh, okay.
So for me, it was like, well, why,
Yeah.
And actually, many people in Quebec don't get married, and they have kids, and everything is fine. So for me, it was like, well, what's the point of getting married? There's no real point to it. Um, but then, a few years ago, I realized the advantages, more the legal advantages of actually, being married. And so that's when I started to say, well, okay, let's get married.
Mm-hmm.
And then so for me at that point, it was like, well, let's get married now.
Okay.
Because we're looking at buying a house, and
Uh-huh.
so it was like, well, you know, if we're going to be doing like big investments like that, if we're going to have children, then there is a benefit to having that
Yes.
that
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah.
And I will say that my husband, he had that plan in his mind. Like for him, it was, well, it was we live together, we buy a house, and then we get married, and then we have kids. Where I think in other parts of the world, it's often you get married, then you live together, you buy the house, the kids afterwards. So, but for my husband, it was important that we live together, and for me too, that we live together, see if we're actually,
Yes.
compatible.
Yes.
Um, but definitely for him, it was important to be married before having children. So it was kind of one of those funny things where I was like, no, we don't need to be married. And he was like, no, I'd like to be married.
And you're like, okay, fine.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was like, well, but now. It didn't happen. Nah, it didn't happen right away after we got engaged, but
Well, because pretty much you already had this second step planned and
well,
and
that's it.
wanted, and then yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you probably weren't the type of girl who's like dreaming about wedding or, wearing a
Oh no,
dress. Yeah.
not at all. Not at all.
So how
How
was
about you? Were you like that too, or?
No, not at all. Yeah, never. So I think it turned out good because I just had a quick courthouse wedding, and
Uh,
I think if I would have been somebody has this big dream, it would have been so hard to compromise and give up on it. But
yeah,
because it wasn't that important for me, I was just like, oh, okay,
yeah.
we'll
But
do what we
that's how my
have to.
husband felt actually, because I was like, oh, let's
Yeah,
just elope. Let's just
yeah,
go to a mountaintop and like get married there, and we
yeah,
don't need anybody else.
yeah.
But for him, it was important to have that big wedding. So yeah, so like what you just said, that for him it was difficult to compromise and think of eloping or having a very small wedding. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we did have those discussions.
So how did you guys talk about that, or what did you ended up deciding? What was kind of the starting point?
So one of the things that is very traditional often, especially for Italians, is to have a big, big Italian wedding. I'm sure you've heard of that before. Big Italian wedding, 300 people. I definitely did not want that. Uh, we couldn't afford that. So the compromise came more in establishing the budget. So
Okay.
for me, it was, I never dreamed of having a big wedding. It wasn't something that was super important to me. So, I basically said, well, I'm willing to spend X amount of money. What can we do with that amount? And so that's how we came to our compromise. And so we ended up inviting about 100 people,
Hmm.
which is still bigger than what I
Yeah, it's
had
still not a
envisioned.
small wedding. Yeah.
No, but I think we ended up being maybe close to like 85 or so. So it wasn't a gigantic wedding either. So it was,
Hmm.
we did meet
Yeah.
in the middle somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, and the parts that I mean that were like not super traditional was that we got married in a restaurant. We got married in the middle of winter, um, brunch wedding menu, like so a daytime wedding. Um, so those elements were different from other weddings that we'd been invited to or that I I started to see a lot more in Bridezilla that there were people going that route, but it still was something that was fairly uncommon when we were initially planning.
Hmm.
So it actually, because of all those elements, it did take us quite a while before we actually figured out where we were getting married and all
Okay.
that. So we initially got engaged in 2016, but we only got married this at the beginning of this year.
Hmm.
Well, initially part of it was that, I mean, it was just so overwhelming to sift through all of the different possibilities. I mean, you go to those bridal salons and it's for huge halls and, like big, like very fancy things, which is beautiful, but it didn't feel like us and also just didn't fit the budget. Um, and so it took a while to like figure out, well, okay, what elements are actually important to us and what isn't, and what aren't important to us. And also, my husband was doing his PhD, so he wasn't as available to help with planning. And again, being the person who hadn't wished or sort of dreamed about a big wedding, it it was hard to wedding plan for something that I was like, it goes so against what I had envisioned. So I wanted him to be available. Um, but obviously he was so busy with his PhD. So yeah, anyways, all that to
That's,
say that it took us some time
yeah.
between getting engaged and actually getting married.
Yeah. But that's really nice of you. That just shows how much how important it is to make your partner happy, to really just do what makes him happy and not just think about
Yeah.
what you want, even if he
Yeah.
can't contribute to it as much as you wish he would.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you want.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie and say that I was super nice the whole time. We did have some arguments, you know.
Yeah.
Then I'd be like, "Yeah, this is important to you. I need your input."
Yeah.
So yeah, we did. Yeah, thank
I
you for
get
being
it.
so sweet.
I
But
get it. I get it. And I wish these bridal shows would have more these unique locations or something.
yeah,
Even maybe it doesn't have to be on bridal shows because then it's catered towards couples who are engaged, but just like some resource where you can find these ideas or these locations that are budget friendly. Yeah, because like
yeah,
you said,
and
it's
even
just so hard to find those.
well, that's it. And even like searching for those things that are like slightly unique or individualized. I felt that that was hard too when I was going to the big bridal shows. In fact, when we were engaged, there was this new type of bridal salon or bridal show that started, and it's called Le Coeur Bohème, and it was for those unique experiences. And I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, like, we're going to be able to find things that are so, out of the box and different, and we can really make it our own. Um, and then I was a little bit disappointed because it was so expensive. And,
Oh.
I was like, oh, okay. Because of course, as soon as as soon as it's, for weddings, then the price I felt
Yeah.
got marked up a lot. So people are willing to pay the price, and that's totally fine. That was still a challenge, even though I was like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
there's things that are slightly different now.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's talk about cultural differences, traditions. When you started, going down the road of planning and figuring out what traditions you would want to implement into your wedding, what you absolutely don't want to. You mentioned when we were talking previously that you also had to blend some religious together, some languages. So, talk a little bit about that. How was it to plan it? Were you asking your then fiance, "Hey, what do you do in Italian weddings?" or were you
yeah.
just Googling it? So how did you find out what is it even? What should we even use? Or did you talk to your parents and their parents or his parents? Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely a mixture of all of the above. So Google, asking him, asking our parents, um, and uh, neither one of us is religious. Like we don't practice. So he's Jewish, technically. Like he always says, "I'm Jewish." Um, yeah. So from his mom's side, she's Jewish. From his dad's side, he's Catholic, and
Okay.
I'm Catholic as well. But again, we don't practice. So finding elements that were unique to our cultures, but that were not religious, that was a challenge, I would say. So there was something that I knew that was just very common to Latino weddings, that I was Googling or that I was seeing on, well, anywhere. Like I was seeing on Google, I was seeing on Instagram.
Yeah.
I knew about from previous weddings that I'd attended. But to me, it felt very tied with the church and with religion. So in the end, I didn't actually do that, which now I'm like, oh, I could have modified it to fit with us. So I'm like, that was a missed opportunity, but whatever, it's fine. But essentially, it's where you have like beads, the very like long rosary, and you put it around both spouses'
Okay.
necks. So basically, it's the union of both people. Um, but it's again, it's like a rosary, it's beads. So it didn't feel like it fit us because of it being so tied with religion. But again, like if I just didn't in the moment think of, well, how could I modify that to fit us? In terms of for David, he doesn't practice Judaism, but there were certain elements that are very common to Jewish ceremonies, like breaking the glass at the end, doing the hora, stuff like that, having the huppah. So we talked to one another and said, well, what is important to you and what isn't important to you? So for me, having part of the ceremony be in Spanish was that was non-negotiable.
Okay.
So that was something, we found uh, an officiant. Sorry, I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
of the word in French. We found an officiant who speaks obviously French and English, and who is willing to say certain things in Spanish. So that to me was important. For David, we ended up adding the breaking of the glass at the end of the
Okay.
ceremony. He didn't care about the huppah. That would have been an extra element for us to design and to bring to the restaurant. They didn't have that. So so he said, well, it's not that important to me, so we don't need to include that. But breaking of the glass, he wanted to do that actually as a surprise to his mom. So
Mm, okay.
so we went out for coffee or something with his family once, and we asked them, well, what are certain things that are important to you for the ceremony? Or I actually no, scratch that. I think his mom had asked us, oh, are you going to include any like Jewish traditions? Are you going to have breaking of the glass? Are you going to have the huppah? Are you going to have the hora? And we just by chance, David and I had already discussed these things, and David had said that he wanted to surprise his mom. So he was like, no, we're not thinking of doing that. We don't really want any sort of like Jewish or like very traditional or religious thing. So no, we're not going to include any of that. And his mom was like, what? Like you could tell that she was a little bit disappointed. Um, so, but we ended up obviously including the breaking of the glass. In our discussions, David and I had said that I didn't feel comfortable doing the hora. That was my personal uh, comfort. And yeah, so I told him, like, I'll do it if it's really important to you, but just like that, like, no, it's not something that I'm super keen on. And he said, no, that's okay. Like, if you're not comfortable with it, then like if you're gonna feel nervous or scared while doing the hora, like I don't want you to feel like that on our wedding day. So no, we don't have to do it. So that was really nice.
Okay, for just I'm thinking about the listeners. Maybe if
Oh yeah.
somebody is like, I don't know what hora is and why she
Yes.
decided not to do it.
Yeah. So essentially the hora is where yeah, and I had also Googled it because I wanted to
Right.
have like arguments. So basically, the hora is where there's a specific song that's put on, and then the bride and the groom are sitting in chairs, and the guests end up lifting the bride and groom and kind of like putting them up in the air, and like dancing around. And so for me, it was like in my mind, I was just envisioning myself on a chair, like kind of bouncing up and down, like up in the air. If I fell, like, so it was just like I was going to sort of the worst case scenario. Um, and
Yeah.
my dress was tight and that sort of thing. So I was
Uh-huh.
just like, this is just not, it's, yeah, in my mind, it's not what I want. Um, so yeah, that's essentially the horror. When I looked it up, because I knew that not everybody would be in agreement with that. So I looked it up and traditionally what it was is that the bride and groom would be sitting in a chair and you put that song on and all of the guests would gather around the bride and groom and dance for them. But then at one point, some genius, some person decided that, oh no, let's actually just make it more fun and lift the bride and
Mm,
groom.
okay.
Anyways, that was what I found in my research. Maybe some listeners won't agree with that, but that was what I had found when I Googled it.
Uh-huh.
And so I was like, well, if people are willing to dance around us, that's fine. But I don't
Oh,
want to be
okay.
with.
So did you ended up doing that version of it? No.
No, and in the end, honestly, we were pulled left, right, and center so much for pictures that we ourselves barely spent time on the dance floor. So even if, well, I think that if somebody had put on that song, like it would have happened, but yeah, like we were really not like on the dance floor as much as we would have liked.
Mm-hmm. So you just left it as it is.
Yeah.
If it meant to be, it would have happened.
Yeah, well, sort of.
Sort of.
We did. We told some people that we knew would be likely to lift us up to say,
Uh-huh.
let's not do
Uh-huh.
that.
Okay.
So we warned some people that it wasn't really what we wanted to do.
That's nice of them that they actually listened.
Yes. Well, yeah, we were quite adamant
Yeah.
about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. You have to be because sometimes
Yeah.
people think that no, you have to do this because you're gonna regret it or something.
Well,
They
that's it.
just think they
Yeah.
know better than how you feel.
Yeah. Or they're like, oh no, they're just being, they're just saying that they don't want to, but
Yeah,
like
they
when they're
actually
doing it in the
do.
moment, then they'll realize, yeah. But yeah, for me, it was like, nope. And my husband really respected that, and I really,
Hmm.
really appreciated it.
That's
So,
good.
so he was actually the one to tell people like, no, we're not doing this, and
Hmm.
we approached it as a team. So it wasn't, well, Karen doesn't want to do it. Like we would approach it as we don't want to do it, and that made a difference as well.
Oh, that's very important always. I
Yes.
I struggled with that here too in America. As somebody who immigrated to a husband who is from America, it's always something that I wanted to feel like he's on my side, even if he
Mm,
thinks that my traditions or my habits are weird. Like we can talk
yeah,
about that, between the two of us. But when you're approaching something to a third person, they have to feel that we are a team. It doesn't
exactly.
matter, what tradition it's coming from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So was
Yeah.
his mom surprised when she saw the breaking the
Uh,
glass?
yeah,
Uh,
she started crying right
oh,
away. It was so sweet. Yeah.
I
And
bet.
yeah, and yeah, I mean I had offered also or I'd asked like I know that traditionally it's the man who will break the glass and I had asked, well, do you want to put a modern spin on it or do you want to put a different spin on it where we're both breaking the glass and so like that's also me like sort of saying like, I welcome you and your traditions. But he said, no, I really want to do this on my own. I want to do this like for me and for my mom. So of course, that's the way that we did it. And oh, it was so sweet. In the moment, she was so happy
No.
and she thanked us afterwards and she was like, I was actually really disappointed when you told us that you weren't going to do it. So it really meant a lot to me. So yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was it was very special.
Mm-hmm. So she wasn't upset, like, why did you give this away from me? She actually took it as a surprise. So, was there any other elements that you can think of that was pulled from a specific tradition or culture?
Um, Apart from like, again, having signage in Spanish, having our save the dates and invites be part in Spanish and in English, and also obviously a lot of Latin music on our playlist. Apart from that, oh, and sorry, my mom made some cookies that are typical of El Salvador. So we had those types of things present at our wedding. Uh, Obviously because we were hosting out of a restaurant, it was limited in what we could do in terms of food. So
Okay.
again, like I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of our uh, sort of starting points for when we're talking about our different cultures are centered around food. So it would have been nice to have a few more elements, like food elements, that are, typical of our own separate backgrounds to put them together. But we just, we couldn't do that because we were hosting at a restaurant, and obviously we wanted to respect that. So so yeah, so we, little few things, the cookies that my mom was able to make. But yeah, apart from those elements, there wasn't much more else. Um, when I was trying to look up, Latina weddings or Latin American weddings and that sort of thing, a lot of things that I was finding were like dark, moody, red, like,
Oh.
and that's like red is my favorite color. So it's sort of matches, but it was not not because of it being very Latina.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that was just my personal preference also. But again, I've noticed it very much in those pictures that I saw. So I was like, well, okay. But I mean, I I can't say that there are certain colors that are specific to cultures.
Yeah.
So I
But it's
I personally
interesting
don't.
when you Google something, it just kind of gets that feel to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh. So did you go with the red then?
Oh yeah,
Implemented?
I had burgundy. I had burgundy nails.
Okay.
I had dark burgundy lips. I had roses in my hair.
Oh, that's pretty.
I had red shoes. But again, those were like my own personal style and preferences, things that I had wanted from when I was actually planning, and wanting to have a wedding. And, we had the bridesmaids in burgundy. So yeah. But again, it wasn't so much a nod to like my culture because again, I don't see specific colors as being part of specific cultures personally. It was more just what is our personal preference. And
Yeah.
it just worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when, people look at you, they can tell that, oh, that's so you. That's so Karen. That those,
Yes,
the flowers and the red shoes. And you
exactly.
can say, well, this actually, I was looking into, Latin cultures and a lot of red came up. And so, yeah, it's nice to discover that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, it was sort of like like a discovery, and I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's neat."
Yeah. If some couples are also trying to plan maybe a wedding that's added some different language elements into it, can you give them some advice, maybe even just logistically or practical advice on how to do that? How did you find the officiant who speaks the
hmm
language? Like, do they put them on their website, or do you have to call them and ask that question, or if they speak another language? And also with the invitations, you mentioned that you used both languages. I see all the time that couples would struggle with designing a bilingual
Yeah.
wedding invitation. So, any advice for that?
Yeah. Use your friends and family. So I was often so for the officiant, what ended up happening is that most or many officiants in Quebec will speak definitely French. In Montreal, many of them will speak a second language, usually English, and some of them speak a third language. Uh, so for this officiant, I believe that I found him through an organization that said they have bilingual
Okay.
officiants, and that there are some officiants that also speak another language apart from English or French. So I went through that organization, and then uh, so I just sort of contacted and through Wedding Wire contacted saying, well, I'm getting married around this time of year. Are you available? And then when he contacted me, one of the first questions that I asked him was, well, Spanish is, it's my mother tongue. So would you be willing to speak in Spanish? Do you know Spanish? And so he said, oh, I don't speak Spanish like very well, but I know a few words here and there. If you're willing to do the translations for me, I'm more than willing to incorporate that in the ceremony. So I Googled, I looked up examples of ceremonies in Spanish. I asked my mom to help me with the translations. So same for the invite, same for the signage. I Googled, but I also used my friends and family who speak Spanish as well, to just double check and triple check and make sure that it made sense. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. Oh wow, you put so much work into this.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I hesitated to. Well, I wouldn't say I hesitated, but I didn't find right off the bat an officiant that was Hispanophone. Um, because if I had found that, then perhaps I would have been more tempted to go with them. But the officiant that we went with, he was very proactive, and he was the one who contacted me right away. As soon as I contacted that organization, he contacted me like in the few minutes right after. I
Wow.
had such a real good feel with him over the phone that I was like, well, like I really like this person, so even though they're not Hispanophone, that's fine as long as they're willing. And he was so willing, and he did such a great job. For others, it maybe makes more sense to go with someone who is native in that language, um, or for other. And I also didn't find like a pastor or a priest, because again, that wouldn't have felt quite in line with who we are. But that, obviously that's another avenue.
Yep.
We do have churches where it's all in Spanish, the mass and everything. So that would have been an option, but like I said, it didn't fit quite with us and who we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also wanted to mention, like, I feel like when you're trying to blend cultures together on a wedding day, that, for example, Jewish weddings, they have such a distinguished and strong traditions, and maybe
Hmm.
something that's well known for most people, even not non-Jewish people. that it's kind of easy to decide, do we want this or do we don't want it, and it's very visual tradition. But I know that there's other cultures where some traditions are just so subtle or not
Yeah.
well known, and it's really hard to find out if you even want to use it or not. Yeah.
That's it. And that's what I struggled with a little bit because I was like, well, apart from the Spanish and the food and the dancing, like, what other elements do I want? Because I've removed the whole religious part of it, which religion is very it's a very strong factor in Latin culture. So I was struggling a little bit in finding that balance. Yeah, I didn't find that there was much on the internet that I could find that spoke to that.
Yeah, I feel that same way in Hungary. Just religion is so strong, and I think in most cultures probably,
Yeah,
religion is where marriage comes from,
exactly.
in some way. And in these modern days, I think couples are trying so hard to make new traditions, and I think
Yeah.
over the years we're gonna probably switch it up a little bit. And obviously those couples who find religion important, they will keep that going, which is
Yeah.
fine. But it's
Yeah.
good to have options. And like you said, you constantly struggled with finding ideas and finding ways to do things without disrespecting or without making somebody upset. So yeah, I definitely feel like that's a challenge. And so now
Yeah.
that you're kind of over it and it's done, do you feel like
Yeah.
there's something that you wish you would have done, something that you wish you wouldn't have done, just looking back?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I think I sort of wish I maybe had been a little bit more imaginative in having that lasso around us. But I mean, it's not a huge regret. It's not like, oh my God, let's redo it
Yeah.
for that. I always tease my husband that, like, okay, you got the wedding, so like next time we're eloping, we're gonna do a vow renewal and we're gonna elope to the mountaintop. Um,
Nice.
so
I love that.
that's where that's
Yeah,
my
that's when
focus.
we're gonna do that.
Exactly. I haven't decided yet at what anniversary, but so yeah. But yeah, I mean,
And then
is there
also you
anything?
were saying that they're made out of beans. Is that also a religious has a religious meaning to it? Do you know anything?
Oh, no, sorry, beads. Like
Beads.
the rosary beads.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they can be beans also, I imagine.
Okay.
It's a necklace and there's beads on it. And sometimes it's beans, sometimes it's other materials like wood or whatnot. And each bead is a specific prayer. So you can have different lengths to your rosary. So some I think are, no, I'm not going to say the number because I might get it wrong. But there's like longer ones or there's
Okay.
shorter ones,
Okay.
and each, like I said, each bead is a prayer. So oftentimes my grandmother, who couldn't attend the wedding because she's from El Salvador and would not have tolerated the cold. It was -20 on our wedding day. Um, so when
Wow.
you're from a
Celsius?
country,
Celsius.
yes, yes. So when you're from a country where it's typically 40 degrees Celsius and like 100% humidity, she wouldn't have been able to handle it. So that I would say is like it's unfortunate, and I wish that she could have been there, but I also recognize that she couldn't be there. Um, but yeah, anyways, my grandmother is often praying with that rosary.
Okay.
Um, so I mean, yeah, I also toyed with the idea of just like having one with me just to sort of
Mm-hmm.
represent my grandmother. Would I go back and change things? Not necessarily. Not for those elements, no. Um, what my grandmother did come to town over the summer when it's a bit more warm.
Oh, nice.
She's still frozen, but anyway.
Really?
Yeah, oh my goodness, she's so cute. She's wearing like when she comes in the summer, she wears a full-on shawl and toque, and it's adorable.
Wow.
It's also really, I feel really bad for her because she's so cold. But anyway, so I had her come over, and my husband and I put our wedding wear. So he put on his suit, and I put on my
Oh,
dress, so we could take pictures with her, and
wow. I
it
love
was
that.
really special. Yeah, but I did hire my makeup artist from the wedding day. I asked her if she would come over, and so she did my makeup, and it was actually really fun because my grandmother was like, you don't need to put makeup, and you don't need to get all like fancy and everything. So what we ended up doing was sort of asking my grandmother her input. So asking her, okay, well, what color lipstick should we put on Karen? What color eyeshadow should we put? So she was a little bit directing the show, and yeah, so that was kind of fun. So I didn't have like a fully recreated like wedding look, but it was nice because it was how my grandmother would have wanted to see me on my
Yeah.
wedding day. So
Wow.
that was nice.
That's beautiful. I
Yeah,
love this
thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks.
Did you have any other guests maybe coming from, from another country or having to accommodate them from, like a destination?
Yeah, so I had so initially I didn't want to invite anybody who wasn't really local, just again, guest list, budget, not wanting to um offend any relatives because I have so again, like I don't know my father's side really. Like I know very little. So that wasn't the question, but it was more on my mother's side where we're over 20 first cousins, and then certain cousins have their kids of their own. Um, so I was like, well, I can't, like, that's an additional, what, 30, 40 people easily. So I initially didn't want to invite anybody from the States, but I mean, that was also really hard. My mom was very adamant that I had to invite at least certain people. And I was like, but if I invite them, then I have to invite their siblings. Anyways, in the end, long story short, I invited some people, not everyone. I didn't get any backlash, so hopefully that means that either people are so mad at me that they don't want to talk to me ever, or they understand,
Yeah.
and it's not a big deal. So I'm hoping it's the latter. But yeah, so I did have a few relatives that came in from the States, and that was really nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's cool.
I didn't get to spend much time with them, just so busy,
Yeah.
as you know.
Yeah.
But it was lovely to have them there.
Yeah. So fun.
Yeah.
I see we're almost like hitting a 1 hour
Oh yeah.
chat.
Oh
It's
my
just
goodness.
going by so fast.
I know.
Do you feel
I'm
like,
trying to look at
yeah,
questions.
yeah, do you feel like there's any question that I maybe forgot something important in your mind that you feel like you wanted to talk about this? Any tools or resources or vendors?
I used Instagram a lot. So I used like, hashtags, and I looked up like hashtags in Spanish and in English, and so that was very helpful for me to find things that, because again, like because I was struggling so much to find things that were unique to the Latin culture. I was trying to find that through Spanish hashtags. Um, and so yeah, so Instagram was super helpful. There were certain websites that I used. So there was a Practical Wedding that I used, Brachilla, obviously, but I only discovered it very late. Like I
Oh yeah.
discovered it in November of, so right before my wedding. I had like 3 months. I was like, oh, I could
Uh-huh,
have learned
uh-huh.
so much. I used Rock and Roll Bride also.
Okay.
I really tried to look for websites that were a little bit off the beaten path. Um, yeah, that were a little bit different. Because I'm a little different.
Yeah.
We all are, right? But I was like very adamant in my mind that like I didn't want to have like a very typical wedding. Uh, so anyway, so I'm a little stubborn.
No,
So I
it's
used,
you have to be.
yeah. I did use initially. oh my goodness, what is it called? Wedding wire.
Okay.
I ended up using it more for finding vendors. It didn't pan out with all of those vendors, but it was a good starting point to look for venues and that sort of thing. But I wasn't in love with the kind of attitude on the forums. So that's my own personal.
Of
You know,
other brides or the vendors?
uh, the vendors I found that they were quite expensive, especially going through, obviously well-known wedding website. And then just more the attitudes of other people that were planning their wedding. Because there's a lot of like, one should do things this way, or one should do things that way, or this is how it's traditionally done. And oh, you're doing something different? Like, why would you do that? And I was like, well, and not necessarily towards me, but like that's what I was noticing a lot in the comments. And I didn't really like that. And I mean, you'll get that anywhere where it's a public
Yeah.
space and anybody can comment, right? So, but I feel like there's a little bit less of that on Bridezilla, which is nice. Um, and I'm the type of person who also doesn't like to be told what I should do.
Mm-hmm. I definitely got that from you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if somebody were to tell me you should do it this way, I'd be like, really?
Then
Are you
you're
sure?
not.
No, I'm not gonna do it.
Just
Yeah,
because you told me I should, now I
exactly.
don't want to.
Exactly. I didn't do a garter toss. I didn't do a bouquet toss. Yeah. It's just like, no, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah. And then sometimes, like, you get confused. Like, for example, dad walking you down the
Yeah.
aisle, and then you hear or read some comments. Oh, maybe I shouldn't because it means this and that, but I really want to. And then you're just,
Yeah.
the more you read and the more you know and hear people's opinion, the more you get confused. And
Exactly. For
hmm.
me, I actually walked myself down the aisle.
Okay.
And the processional song was a song by the Chili Peppers, which was
Cool.
special to us because it was um, our first concert together was to the Chili Peppers.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, and the song that we ended up choosing is called Hard to Concentrate, and it's a really beautiful song. If you listen to the lyrics, like it's it's like vows. Um, and so, like you don't usually get like rock and roll or rock songs at a wedding or that sort of thing. And my sister-in-law actually was like, "Oh, that should be your first dance," because she knows how much we love the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And we were like, "Well, like it's kind of hard to dance to, but how else can we incorporate it?" So we incorporated it for the ceremony, for the processional. Um, but yeah, and just myself walking myself down the aisle, that was important to me as well, and not having to focus on anybody else, but just focus on getting to the end of the aisle to be with my husband. And something that I didn't realize would be nice and that I didn't expect it was our officiant. Um, when I got to the end of the aisle, so typically it's the bride and groom facing each other, or the two partners facing each other. Um, and my husband, as soon as he saw me, he started bawling, which was super funny and ironic because like the whole week beforehand, he had been like, "Oh, your makeup artist better use waterproof makeup because you're gonna be crying the whole time. You're gonna be a mess." And he was teasing me, and I'm usually an emotional wreck, and I was fine. I was totally fine until I saw him crying, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, keep it together." So I'm walking down the aisle, like not like really crying, and my husband is bawling. It was the
Oh.
sweetest thing. And anyways, I get to the end of the aisle, and I reach out to my husband, we grab each other's hands, and I honestly just really wanted to give him a big hug and give him a kiss. But that's not usually how it goes.
Yeah.
But and our officiant said, well, typically the partners are facing one another, but for you guys, I see how much you guys just want to be next to one another and be close together that like here, like let's move over. And he moved his podium and told us to stand next to one another facing everybody so that we
Wow.
could hold hands, look at each other, but also look at the crowd and our guests. And it was so, so sweet. And like I said, it was something that I didn't expect. And I didn't know how much it would mean to me because I'd never really seen that. Um, and it was just so special. So yeah, our officiant, he was the best. He was so incredible.
Wow. See, like when we're trying to find a vendor, like even if it's there's something like you said, the language was like, should I keep looking? But you really had that feeling, or like, I think
Yeah,
he's the right one for us. And maybe if you, I was thinking now, if he would have proposed this idea of what if you guys are facing towards your guest, and maybe you would have said, oh, that sounds weird, but like, as because he's done it in the
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
that's talent
yeah.
to
Oh my God,
feel
he's
what the
so
couple
talented.
wants. Yeah. So any final advice for multicultural couples who are planning their wedding and they're feeling this mess and confusion and
Mm.
Googling like crazy?
Yeah. I guess just honestly, just do what feels right for you. I mean, I know that that's
Yeah.
the typical advice now is just do what's right for you and for your partner. Um, and yeah, I mean, really tap into your friends and family, ask them what they've seen in weddings that are from your culture. Um, you know, yeah, especially like I said, I struggled a lot, so I probably could have incorporated other things that I didn't end up doing, just because I didn't know how to like modify them. But so I would say like if there's something that is really important to you or that you find is really cool or and different, um, but there's just one part of it that you're like, well, it doesn't actually fit our personality or it's not us, it doesn't represent us. Modify it, change it up, make it your own. Yeah, so that would be my advice. Take everything, figure out what is important to you. What are things that you're like, well, that would be nice, but I don't know how to incorporate it, and just be creative with it. Just change it up to suit your needs and your preferences.
That's great. Love that. That's a good advice.
I hope it helps.
Yeah, me too. I hope it will help. It's definitely something to think about it because there's just so many options at the end
Oh
when you're
yeah.
thinking about it, especially if you have to add multiple cultures together and you have to make a
Yes.
decision. Okay, what do I want and what do I don't want and why?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also hard too because you're like when you're planning it, you're so focused sometimes on the details. And oftentimes people when they were asking me like, "Oh, how do you feel about your wedding?" And I mean, I was just super stressed. I I'm not gonna lie and say that I loved wedding planning because I didn't. There was a lot of drama, there was a lot of tension, there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stuff. Um, but whenever people were asking me like, how are you feeling about the wedding? I was saying, well, you know what? As long as I get married at the end of the day to David, success. Th that's what it is, as long as that happens, then we've done what we set out to
Yeah.
do. And similarly, when people were asking me, how did your wedding day go? I mean, right after I was a total zombie. So what I could muster up was, well, we got married, so success.
Yep.
So yeah, I know that we sometimes get wrapped up in a lot of the details. Um, there are some details that we incorporated that now I'm super glad that we did. But there's some stuff where I'm like, I spent a lot of time and energy and stress on that. And at the end of the day, it wasn't really that important. So the things that I could identify as being important to me. So having Spanish being part of the ceremony, having Spanish signage, the invitations. So anything having to do with that part of my identity, those are the things that I don't regret spending time on. And similarly for my husband. The other things that were sort of like, well, everybody does this at their wedding and it's like kind of expected. Those are the things that I'm like, we could have not done that. And it still would have been a wedding. Centerpieces, while they're gorgeous, I would say it's probably, at least for me, it wasn't, we spent time on our centerpieces, but that was because we wanted to. So it ended up being kind of like a fun activity. What we ended up doing was we recycled a whole bunch of wine bottles and I delabeled them and cut some of them so that we could put candles inside. And my husband, we found some logs on the side of the road and he cut them. And so we spent time on them, but it was fun. So I don't regret doing that because it also was kind of like a welcome distraction. Like it was an activity. It was a hobby kind of. So, it wasn't expensive centerpieces. They weren't super elaborate, but they, it was fun. And the wine bottles were also kind of representative of us. We like wine. We got engaged on a vineyard. So it was like there were elements to it. The things that I would say don't matter as much are like having signage for everything. So we didn't have a welcome sign. We didn't have bar signs. We didn't have a whole bunch of things. And that was because, are they fun? Are they nice? Yes, it's a nice little touch. But unless it's something that is very important to you for a specific reason, you could probably let that go. I would suggest that people that are planning their wedding now, that they really consider like, why am I putting energy into this specific aspect? Is it because I want to? Is it because I'm expected to? Or I think that I'm expected to? Will it bring me happiness? Will I have fun doing it? If not, chuck it in the fucking bucket.
Yep.
I don't know if I can swear, if I can say that, but
you can say it. I'll just put an explicit sign. And, sometimes people are curious, like, oh, what is this episode about?
Yeah. Definitely chuck so many things in the fucking bucket. Yeah.
Yep. And if any of you listeners don't know what she's talking about, just join the Bright Chilla community and you will know.
Yes, it's so fun. It's really good. Yes. I definitely encourage it.
Yep. Okay, Karen, where can listeners find you if they want to learn more about your wedding or they want to maybe check out some pictures or connect with you?
Yeah, so I haven't actually posted very many.
You haven't?
No, not really. I did a little bit.
Did you get the pictures back from your photographer?
Oh yeah, okay. I got them like 2 months later. But again, I was very, very burnt out after the wedding. Not just because of the wedding, but there were other things also going on in my life at that time. But and again, like I felt kind of like weird about like broadcasting my wedding. Probably because I was not that girl who like dreamt about her wedding day. So yeah, I haven't posted too many, but I will.
Okay, which is fine. If you don't mind, I would love to see them. But if you don't, I totally understand that too.
Yeah. Well, I've actually been meaning to put them on my wedding website or link them on my wedding website, but I haven't. But I will.
Okay.
Eventually. But yeah, people can follow me on Instagram. My handle is KACY1029. I'm on Facebook also. I think I'm private though, so they probably won't have much luck finding me there. Otherwise, I can send you the link to my wedding website, and people can take a look at how I set it up. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. It was lovely talking to you.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you for doing this. It's really cool.
Yes, absolutely. Bye-bye.